Yo, what's up, you guys? It's your girl Trudy LPC, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Self-Aware and Up podcast. I have a very special guest with me this week, Miss Heidi Dunstan. She's a grief advocate. She is also a certified grief educator, as well as a best-selling author, and she is the facilitator of the Lean Into Grief Masterclass. And we are going to be talking about, you probably already guessed it today, grief. We are going to be talking about how to connect, how to talk with people who are experiencing grief, and also talking through those stages of grief in terms of Heidi's own healing. So without further ado, please welcome to the Self-Aware and Up podcast, Miss Heidi Dunstan. Hey Heidi, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm well. Thanks so much for having me.
You are so welcome. I'm really grateful that you decided to come on the show. And I know I kind of gave a brief kind of quick bio, but I want you to just tell us a little bit about yourself, of your story in terms of how you got so involved in being a grief advocate.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's kind of a crappy story, in the
Okay.
sense that I came by it naturally, and I had to learn the hard way after losing my husband unexpectedly. He died of a massive heart attack 2 days after Christmas and the
Wow.
day before my 40th birthday. And
Wow.
it was completely unexpected. Nobody had any idea. It was the most devastating day of my life.
Yeah.
And I was with him. I was there. I did CPR. I
Mm,
was there for time of death. I was there for all of it.
yeah.
And it was extremely traumatic. It was really, really hard. And I have great people in my life, but I learned that some of those great people really had no idea what to say or what
Yeah.
to do. And they said and did things that missed the mark.
Mm,
As I started to spend time with other grievers, because that's where I started to feel more comfortable, I learned that my story wasn't unusual,
mm,
and that many grievers, in fact, a lot of grievers go through that. Did you really just think about what you just said?
mm.
I can't believe they just said that to me. Or every time I hear this, it makes me feel gross. Um, and I realized that we live in a very grief unaware society.
Yeah.
We've never been taught. We've been taught to say, I'm sorry for your loss. We've been taught to send a card and maybe flowers. We've been taught to maybe go to a service. And we've been taught to maybe create a lasagna, make a lasagna or some food and send it over. And that's about all we know how to do.
Yeah.
And as soon as a service is over, people really don't know what to do. And yet grief goes past a lot further than our cultural norms of what we're good at. And
Right.
so I really see the need for
Mm,
us to become more grief aware and realize what grief is and what it looks like, and to stop some of the judgment around grief, and to help people to know what to say and what not to say and why not to say it,
mm,
and what to say when you do F it up,
mm.
right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I even, this is what I'm passionate about talking about, and there's times that I F it up too, because it's not a science. It's grief is as individuals our fingerprints, so you can say something that might be appropriate later, but it may be not appropriate at that time, and you don't know.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's what I do. That's why I do it. Um, and I can say that I've had a pretty amazing response where people are like, that's totally me. I stick my foot in my mouth. Or
Mm,
I've lost a few friends because I didn't know what to say. And I
yeah.
didn't, so we stopped talking. And so people have found it helpful because the relationships that they have in their life matter, and they don't want to lose them, and they don't want to F them up. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that I love what I get to do. It's part of my husband Mike's legacy. And
Mm,
it helps me to see that people can grieve gracefully together. They don't have to do it alone.
yeah. I love that. I love what you do. I, even as a therapist, it's sometimes really, really hard to find the ways to really, you know, speak about grief, especially like when the loss is fresh, because it's kind of like, I've gone through multiple losses in my life. And, I don't know if people said the right things or not, because I think I was so consumed in those moments with the loss, but it can even be something that we can learn from, in terms of like what to not say to a client and what to not say, to even if it is just a friend or someone that we're close to. So I help clients grieve, but I know that there's definitely still things that I'm hoping to learn from you today in terms of things that can help me progress as a therapist in terms of dealing with that. Um, why do you think a lot of people are uncomfortable kind of with navigating grief?
because we're afraid to die.
Mm,
We whitewash death now more than ever.
yeah.
Do you, and I think you're probably a little bit younger than me, but before I remember as a child always seeing hearses.
Mm,
Now we transport bodies in unmarked white vans. We hide it.
mm. Where are you located at?
Canada.
Canada. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. That's
But
what see
I
because
mean,
we still have hearses here. Like,
I was just at a service last week, and there was a hearse at the. But when we go to pick up, when funeral homes now in major centers go to pick up remains at a
mm.
hospital, they do it in unmarked vans. They don't do it in hearses anymore.
Oh wow. That's interesting. I worked in a hospital and I will be honest with you, I've never followed anyone that's coming in to remove a body and take it to the funeral home. I've never followed it out to the car. I'll
Yeah.
be honest with you. I was the
Yep.
person running through the ER every time I saw that
Yeah.
cover pulled over, them rolling someone out. And of course I would know when someone had passed because I can
What
see it
you
on the
do.
screen, just
Yeah.
see it in the hospital, like, oh, yep, don't go that way. So yeah, I do think we definitely fear. When you said that about the white vans, I was like, oh wow, we don't. But I mean, I could see how that could be a little bit jarring, someone pulling up to the hospital and seeing it. So it makes sense, makes a lot of sense. But
Yeah. But even how we sometimes even transport, like we just don't see it as much.
mm,
And things like COVID, I think, have changed death as well.
yeah,
When we go through a pandemic and so many people have lost their lives, we in our heads go, well, how did they die? Which is also a question people ask that drives me a bit crazy. I don't ask people
mm,
how people die because I can't bring them back to life. But I can tell you that when somebody's died by COVID, it's like, oh, well, a lot of people had COVID,
So we
right?
just desensitized to it because was so normal to lose people back to back then.
Ex- exactly. And it's normal to lose somebody to COVID, but what the person that you're talking to, their life isn't normal,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Their life is changed forever.
Mm,
And they have been changed forever when they've lost somebody that they care about. And so it can be really difficult to navigate. Um, and oftentimes when we enter those kind of conversations, and when we ask, typically the first question we ask somebody is how they died,
mm,
which is, I never believe it's an important question unless you have the ability to bring somebody back from the dead. You actually
mm.
don't really need to know.
Yeah.
And if you were alive during 9/11, or if you're alive when Princess Diana died, those are days that you will know where you were, what you were wearing, what you were eating.
Mm,
The day somebody that they love and cherish died is the same. It is a day that they will remember forever, and it often isn't one that's pleasant.
yeah.
And so you asking them means that they have to relive it. And so if
Mm,
you feel that you need to know, like if you were close enough to the family or if you knew the person, I encourage you to ask, may I ask what happened?
mm,
Ask for permission for them to go there.
yeah.
It's a
Definitely.
way, do you see the difference in the words? And the
Yeah.
words matter, right?
Right.
Like you get that working in therapy, the words matter.
Yeah.
And I'd been asked many, many times, what did your husband die of? What was the cause of death? They were very clinical questions. And when my husband was a fireman, a retired fireman, and when about 9 months later, a man who knew him asked, may I ask? It felt so much better because
Mm,
he knew that I was going to have to go back to that day.
yeah.
And the only reason why he asked was because he saw my husband a week before and then got
Mm,
an email that he was gone. And he was like, I never knew why. He goes, and he was so happy and healthy. And he goes, but I don't want to upset you.
yeah.
Right. And so when you're asking cause of death, know that that question is actually 100% for you and not for them.
Wow. Yeah. I think that that's definitely good to know. And I love the asking for permission, like I think
Yeah.
a lot of times I get that information on the front end, especially if someone's coming to me for grief counseling. They are
Yeah,
going to put that in their intake form. But it definitely is something I know I can be more cognizant of, like just in my day to day. Actually just experienced the loss of someone this week that from my hometown who's a very loved person. And, we all know what, kind of ended his life. He struggled with cancer for about 7 years. And so we kind of all knew that at some point it was going to come, but still a very significant loss. You kind of talked a little bit about just, what not to say, those things that make you cringe. Do you mind sharing some of those things that are things that we should not say to
for
someone who is
sure.
going through the grieving process?
A couple of good ones. We often try to, we're not comfortable with pain. And so
Mm,
we try to find the silver linings. So time heals all wounds.
mm,
That doesn't work in grief because I can tell you it's been 4.5 years since I lost my husband. And I have my days are better. I've got my feet under me, but some days can be just as painful as the day I lost him. And
mm,
so time doesn't heal it, it's still there. And so it's not something appropriate. Um, a lot of people will say, at least they're not suffering anymore. So your friend who passed with cancer, but the person right in front of you is suffering.
mm.
And so you're minimizing their, like, you're trying to find the silver lining in the fact that the person doesn't have pain anymore, but the person right in front of you is in agony.
Yeah.
And it minimizes how they are. Right. And then we also will often say, like, at least you can get another dog.
Mm,
Say that to somebody who's lost a child or had a miscarriage.
yeah.
At least you can have another child.
Mm,
That's not appropriate. We don't get to just fill those voids because guess what? I will still miss my pet that has passed. I will still miss my person.
yeah.
Even if I got another dog or even if I got a goldfish, I still will miss them and we're allowed to,
Mm,
right? People forget that grief is a normal response to loss or change of any kind,
yeah.
right? So you lose your job, you may grieve that job,
Mm,
right? Kids, they grieve beautifully,
mm,
especially little kids, right? Guess what? When they lose their balloon or their favorite pet rock or their ice cream falls on the ground and they cry, that's grief. They're
yeah.
missing something that's important to them. You know what else is grief? When you take the internet code away from a teenager. That grief might look a little different, but
Okay.
it's grief. And
Yeah.
when we learn how to interact with people when they're grieving, especially in those moments, especially with kids, I
Mm,
say we're working our grief muscle and
mm,
it'll help us to acknowledge and see people when they're in pain and grieving other things, like maybe even a loss of a marriage or a
yeah.
relationship, right? We don't lean into those conversations. We tend to avoid them.
Mm,
You know, I remember it was probably about 2 weeks after my husband passed, and I went with my mom to my
mm,
neighborhood pub, and my mom had never been there before. And this was my husband and I went there a lot. It was just around the corner from our house.
okay.
And the waitress just was talking to us about football and all this generic stuff. And I kind of just looked at her. I said, have you heard that Mike passed? And she's like, oh, yeah, I heard, but I'm not really good in those conversations. And so I just don't talk about it.
Mm, yeah.
And you know what she could have quite easily said is because I introduced my mom to her. I mean, I
Mm,
knew the waitress. She could have said, I'm really glad that you're here with Heidi right now.
yeah.
She needs the support. And just acknowledging it, not having to go deep into it, not just, but it's amazing how we sometimes will skate or avoid conversations. And
Mm,
that's one of the things that people often do too, is they don't talk about it.
yeah.
I don't know what to say, so I say nothing. And that silence is deafening to somebody who's grieving. When the
Yeah.
people who are closest to us say nothing, it causes a whole nother level of grief because they feel abandoned.
Mm,
And so sometimes the best thing to say is, I have no idea what I'm going to say. Or most likely, I'm going to F it up.
mm,
And so I want you to know, if I do, tell me so that I can fix it.
yeah.
Because this is hard. It's hard watching you hurt, but you're important to me and I want you to be here with me. I want to be here with you.
Mm,
That is way different than silence.
Yeah. Definitely get that. And I'm really, really glad that you not only focused in on the loss of, a loved one, but also thinking about those other losses, the loss of a pet. It's so crazy because this week has been the week of loss. And it's so interesting that we were recording this episode this week. Because I had a friend also on Facebook who had to make the decision to, put her dog down, or, put him to rest because he was ill for an extended period of time. And, I always think back, I didn't understand that for like when I was in high school. I didn't, like, we had a pet, and the pet, my stepmother mom ran over our dog by mistake, obviously. And, it's like, okay, yeah, Rex died. And then I remember being in high school and having a teacher who had a pet, had a dog for like many, many years, and her being out of school. Like, she was like, I'm out, and I'm thinking like, who died? And she's like, oh, my dog. And I was just like, it didn't even register because like I'm like 15. I don't know. Like, I'm not even thinking about it because I never had a long-term pet. And then now it's like, oh my God, like I would lose my mind if either of the dogs that are in my life were no longer in my life. So I think it is important to acknowledge that grief looks differently for people. And it can be, the loss of a pet. It can be the loss of something else meaningful, as well as the loss of a relationship. That is hard. And a lot of people even struggle with that. So I really appreciate you, giving space and giving knowledge towards those things as well, because it really is important.
And they impact so many of us,
Yeah.
right? So oftentimes when somebody loses a pet, I say, my heart goes out to you, because it's amazing how those little fur animals have an amazing ability to wrap themselves around our hearts. And we don't
Mm.
always totally know it until they're gone.
Yeah.
And, and it's funny because sometimes we complain about our pets and we're, oh, I gotta go walk the dog, or, oh, I gotta clean the cat litter, whatever. And
Hmm.
then when they're gone, it's like there's this void. And and some animals are just cool animals and they connect with everybody. And so it's really important that we acknowledge and know that for some people, like my cat is like my baby. I've had her for 15 years. I know
Wow.
there's going to become a day that I'm going to lose her.
Yeah.
And her and I talk about it. I mean, I talk to her, right? Like, but she's like my baby. And when people are like, oh, fur babies, I'm like, you don't know until you've had one.
Yeah.
Plain and
You
simple.
really
So we
don't.
don't get to judge. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I encourage people, the one thing with grief that comes a lot of is judgment.
Mm.
And what I encourage people to remember is that grief is as individuals our fingerprint, and nobody does it the same.
Mm.
And so what happens with grief is we often go, "Ah, they're not crying. Like they
Mm.
must not have missed the person because
Yeah.
they're not crying." Well, maybe that person's not a crier, or maybe they don't cry publicly,
Yeah.
or they're crying so much. Like, aren't they over it already?
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
There's no timeline on grief
Yeah.
ever, because I believe grief is love. And when we grieve somebody, we love them. It
Yeah.
wouldn't hurt if we didn't love them.
Exactly.
And so grief can also be beautiful. It could be a way that you honor them. It could be like me doing this podcast and going, Mike made a difference in my life, and I want to help people to move through grief a little bit more gracefully. Or it could be that they made mom's favorite cinnamon roll recipe. Or they could be that I'm doing this bike ride in honor of my sister who passed. Some like there's places where we honor the people that we've lost too, and that's grief. It's
Yeah.
not just all hard. It can be really beautiful too. And so when we can look at grief and go, I see you're hurting right now, or I see this is hard right now, rather than why are you doing it that way? And
Mm.
know that their way is their way and you don't get to dictate how their way is.
Yeah.
Just as when it's your time to grieve, it'll be your way. And I always tell people, I give the analogy, have you ever watched like America's Got Talent, or
Mm.
right, any of those shows? When they hit the golden buzzer and people celebrate, they never celebrate the same,
Mm.
and we never judge them,
Right.
but we do judge how people move through pain,
Yeah.
and it isn't fair.
Yeah.
So let the judgment go. Judgment, I believe, is grief's kryptonite. I believe that when we judge people and when we judge ourselves and how we're moving through grief, it stops us from feeling the emotions. So if you're grieving and you're like, why am I feeling this? Why is this so hard? Why I thought I went through this already. Why is it back again? That's judgment. And it keeps you here rather than here.
Yeah.
And I had to stop asking myself why a lot. And I had to just say, this is hard and it hurts today. And tomorrow's a new day, or it hurts in this moment and the next moment can be better. And I had to make those conscious choices so that I could show up and not be a puddle. I'll be really honest with you. If I stayed in the why, I'd be a disaster. I wouldn't be able to do this powerful work.
Yeah. It's definitely very powerful work that you are doing, because it's not easy. It's not easy for me as a therapist. It's not easy for me just as a person, as a human being. So I definitely appreciate the work that you do and just being honest and open about just, how we should look at grief differently. I love that you emphasize, the not judging the grief, because that's something that when I'm working through grief with clients, and I've had some very long-term clients that I've had to work through grief with, from like the beginning of that loss through, sometimes 2 years out from that loss. And people are asking themselves, why am I still feeling this way? And I like to go through an exercise around the griever's rights, and really, affirming the fact that it is okay for you to grieve however you want, whenever you need to. And it's your right to do so. You don't have to worry about what other people think of you or judge yourself for where you are. And I think a lot of that, I have to teach in that process, is just self-compassion and self-love, and giving that. So I love that you are honoring that within yourself, and also teaching other people to honor that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you feel like people should know about how to navigate grief?
Couple big ones that I often share to people and that people find a line is, we often ask people, how are you? And that answer is supposed to be good, fine, or okay. And if you're grieving, even 2-3 years out, you may not be good, fine, or okay. And so I encourage you, change the words a little bit and say, how's today? Where are you at right now? How's today? And I'll be able to hold that space and know that the answer may not be good, fine, or okay. And it might be, I'm shitty. It might be, I haven't slept. It might be, I really miss my person and I just want them back. And don't try to fix it. Try to just say, I see that this is tough right now and I want to be with you. And I don't have words for you. Or it might be, please tell me your person's name. I'd love to know more about them. And lean into the conversation. I call my program Lean Into Grief, because it's those moments when we actually feel like we want to run away. Those are the moments we're meant to lean in. Those are the conversations where we're meant to show up and hold space. And that, you have no idea in grief that may impact somebody until many years later, or a couple of years later. But the people that showed up in those first 2 years for me and held space and sometimes said nothing, that just sat and watched me weep, those people I cherish. Those people I still hold in very high regard.
Yeah.
And so you may not see that impact right now, but I guarantee somebody will be like, thanks for showing up for me when I needed it the most.
Right. Yeah.
And know that grief isn't meant to be done alone. It's love. When you witness deep grief, it's because you're witnessing deep love.
Yeah.
And so see it as an honor, not a curse.
Nice. I definitely appreciate that. I'm over here getting super, super emotional right now. Because, it's just, as you were speaking and just talking about it, like I'm obviously going back to some losses in my life, and even some personal things that are going on in my life right now. And it's, it's really comforting to kind of hear you speak about it in that way. So thank you.
You deserve to be seen at a time when we often hide our pain.
Yeah.
And so know that you deserve to have people hold that same space for you. And I never walk away from a conversation when somebody shares their tears with me. Lots of
Mm.
people say, don't cry, you'll make me cry too. I say, thank you. Thank you for showing me a piece of your heart. Thank you for showing me a part that's hard to show in a world that doesn't like to show imperfect or pain.
Yeah.
I think grief is perfect. I think it is beautiful. It shows me that somebody's shown up and loved somebody and taken the courage to be able to show up and say, this is hard.
Yeah. Definitely hard. But it is something that we can all get through. And I will speak to myself in this moment. I will get through it. Yeah. So I am going to fight through the tears because I do appreciate your openness. And, like I said, there's a lot of things going on right now in my personal life in terms of losing the friend back home and
May I
kind of
ask your
going
friend's
through
name?
Detron.
Mm.
Yeah. And even in that loss, this is not someone that I was even close to, but the impact that he's had is very, very large. And also kind of going through the stuff with the anniversary of my grandmother's death is it's just a lot is going through my head right now. And it was
It's like a big snowball, right? It
yeah,
just, it compounds.
definitely. So, but I am gonna push through because I am a fighter. So um one of the questions that I ask everyone when they come on this show is how do you connect with the idea of being self-aware and effed up?
Grace. You have to be graceful with yourself. You have to turn the shoulds off. You got to tell them to shut the fuck up, to be honest. Stop shooting on yourself and have grace with others. And know that when you do F up, apologize, own it. Turn around and be like, I stuck my foot in my mouth. And that was uncomfortable, and I'm sorry. I want you to know you mean something to me. And I want to be here with you. And please tell me what that looks like. Show up, be accountable, know that you don't need to be perfect, and that people that are grieving will give you the same grace because they need it a lot right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, for just being, like I said, being open and sharing those things because they are things that I'm learning from, things that I think the audience will definitely be able to learn from. This particular subject is hard. It's hard for people to talk about. As you can see, I could not make it through the episode without crying. I was thinking about it last night, like, yeah, this is gonna be a doozy. But your openness and your transparency and just your willingness to just pour into others is really, really amazing. Before I get, your info and share that with the audience, is there anything else you want people to know about just grief in general, like anything, any tips or last words for the audience?
Know that it doesn't have a timeline. Know that somebody could show up grieving really hard and that loss could be 12 years from now. And we don't get to tell them to stop. We get to just see them and love them exactly where they're at because that's what they deserve.
Well, thank you, Heidi. Thank you so much for that. So how can people connect with you, follow you, sign up for your masterclass? How can they reach out to you?
I'm on socials, Insta, Facebook, under Lean Into Grief on LinkedIn. I'm Heidi Dunstan. I'm on Heidi Dunstan on Facebook as well. And then I have a website, heididunstan.ca. There's a free masterclass usually there every 6 or 8 weeks, depending on my schedule. If you're interested, just even send the contact form and I'll send you the next date. And then all the podcasts that I'm on, I usually update on my website. And the conversations are always real and the tears are common. Sometimes they're mine, sometimes they're the podcasters. And I love the fact that people show up and be completely open and vulnerable with me. It's an honor that I truly cherish.
Well, I definitely cherish this moment. Me and my therapist have a lot to talk about on Monday. So But I definitely appreciate your time. So, guys, please make sure that you connect with Heidi, follow her on social media. All of her information will be in the description of this episode. Also, be sure to follow me, Tree the LPC, on all social media platforms under the handle Tree the LPC. Until next time, be safe, be well, and make sure that you take care of your mental health.